Hey guys, welcome back to another lecture on the research paper. Today we're going to be talking about finding good sources and how to do MLA works cited and issues of plagiarism and all that sort of thing. I realized that a lot of this may be some review from last year, but again, it's been a year. So it's good to review those things and to remember them and how to do proper citation and so forth. So we're going to hit on a number of those things today, although I'm going to try not to belabor them too much, just make sure that we've had a good refresher and not spend a ridiculous amount of time on things so that we can keep moving. But please do stick through this whole lecture, and there are a few practice exercises for citation as well that need to be done before midnight tomorrow night, Tuesday night. So if you could pay attention and be working on those. Also looking forward to our video conference tomorrow. So make sure if you've got any questions about citation from this lecture, as well as any questions about the research paper, that you come prepared with those questions as we talk. All right, let's get started. All right, so first we're going to go through a brief overview of finding good sources. This I believe is material that you went over with Mrs. Spies last year, but we'll just breeze through it really quickly again. As a good reminder, the acronym CARDS is a great way to kind of help you remember things that you want to be paying attention to when you're looking at your sources. So credibility, accuracy, reliability, relevance, date, sources behind the text, and scope. So credibility gets at the issue of whether or not the author's opinion on this matter can be trusted. So it has us asking questions like, who is the author and what are his or her credentials? And so why should they be listened to in regard to this particular topic? Obviously for literature, you're going to want someone who has some sort of literary expertise versus Billy Bob Smith, who's a farmer, right? His opinion might be interesting, but he doesn't necessarily have the credentials to weigh in on an academic literary paper. Accuracy. Does the information generally seem accurate? Can facts, statistics, and other information be verified through other sources? Is this the only person claiming this thing, or are there other sources out there that kind of support that? Also, if they are the only person claiming this particular thing, are other aspects of their information supported by other sources? Because people do sometimes have original ideas. And so if their idea is original, can that original idea be supported with other information in their writing that is supported by other sources? Reliability. So basically this has to do with, does the source present a particular view or bias? Probably not something you're going to wrestle with quite as much in a literary paper. That may be more kind of historical or political or scientific, where you might find those things a little bit more. Probably not quite as much of an issue with literary research sources. Relevance. Does this information directly support your thesis and help to answer your question, or is it just kind of related kind of on the side? Now, both of those could be sources that you use, but it's going to determine how you use it, right? A source that addresses your topic directly, you may take a lot more notes from, whereas a source that only kind of addresses a little bit about your topic, you may only take a few notes from a part of that source that's relevant to your paper. So relevance doesn't necessarily mean that you are or are not going to use a particular source. It just has more to do with how you're going to use it and how much you're going to use it. Date. When was this information created and when was it revised, and are these dates meaningful in terms of the subject? It is good to have a wide variety of dates in a literary paper, but it's also important to note that the field of literature is not something that changes as rapidly as history or science. So dates are not super meaningful in a literary research project. Old material can be just as relevant as brand new material, but it's still good to try to have a spread of dates and not only be looking at old sources, but also new sources. All right, sources behind the text, basically meaning, did this author use sources? Were they doing their research? Were they building up an argument based on other information that they found, whether those are primary sources or secondary sources? Were they sourcing their information so that they show that they can be trusted, that they did their due diligence and looked things up and didn't just make it up off the top of their head? Scope. Does this source address my thesis in a comprehensive or peripheral way, and is it a scholarly or a popular treatment? I want to talk a little bit particularly about that second one. Generally speaking, for an academic paper, we're looking at more scholarly treatments, right? Treatments that are intentionally focused on the academic side of things. That doesn't necessarily mean that a popular treatment has no place in it, but a popular treatment is going to be something more like BuzzFeed, a magazine, a newspaper article, and those typically don't hold as much weight as, say, a journal article, a book, something written by a scholar, a professor's web page, or a website that's designated particularly to literary endeavors. So thinking about those sorts of things, right, is this more kind of a popular treatment that's just meant for the general audience, or is this meant more for somebody who's actually studying something? And that's kind of the difference between scholarly and popular treatment. Is this meant for somebody who's actually studying and really trying to learn about this, or is this more kind of just for the casual web searcher or person scrolling through social media who's just going to look at it for 5 minutes and then it's going to move on? All right, so that takes you through cards and a quick reminder of some of the things that you want to be paying attention to when you're evaluating a source. Another helpful thing when you're evaluating internet sources is to look at kind of the dot whatever on the end of it, right? So the kind of web domain that it's occupying, right? That can give you some quick hints as to whether or not it's probably a reliable internet source or whether or not it should maybe be a little bit suspect. So some sources that are almost always reliable: .edu sites. If you've got a .edu address, it's run by an educational institution and therefore can probably be trusted because they're invested in academics, right? It's a scholarly treatment. They're invested in putting up work that is academically sound, whether that's their official work, whether it's the work of a professor or the work of students, they're invested in that. And so you can generally trust information on a .edu site. A .gov site is run by the government. Probably not going to come across that in a literary research paper, but they generally are reliable because the government is interested in, at least the United States government is in fact interested in putting out sound and solid information. A .int is for an international organization. Again, probably not going to use that for a literary research paper, but it's helpful to know it's reliable. .mil is a military website. Again, they're interested in reliable information, probably not super pertinent to your paper. .museum may, in fact, it's a rather rare one, but it is a reminder that museums are generally interested in good information, and a .museum site or just a general museum's website may in fact be something that you might use in this paper. All right, some sites that are usually reliable. Not 100% always, but usually .org and .pro. Those are for organizations and for professionals. And again, organizations and professionals generally can be considered reliable. I would say probably most .orgs and .pros that you're going to come across while researching for literature are going to be invested in accurate information. The one potential hesitation here is that of bias, since organizations and professionals might be supporting a particular product. But if you don't think that the site is generally supporting a particular product, you could probably bank on that it has reliable information. Some possibly reliable or possibly unreliable sources, and I recognize that I have a typo there, some possible reliable and possibly unreliable. Forgive me for the typo. So .com, .biz, and .net. It's pretty easy for anybody to get these types of web domains. So I'd say it's probably about 50-50 chance on these, right? They might be reliable information, but they also might not. So here's where you're going to have to probably pull in a little bit more of that CARDS acronym and those different categories to determine whether or not this site is reliable. You're going to have to do a little bit more of that determination yourself, because there's not really any guaranteed investment in reliable information in these. Pretty much anybody can purchase a .com, .biz, or .net web domain, and so you may want to do some more evaluations. If it's a .name, okay, so if it's like .somebody's name or the organization's name, that means they're running, I think, like an internal server or something, and there's really no accountability on them. So I would be suspect of those sorts of websites. All right, so let's do a quick review on plagiarism. Again, I know you guys have probably heard this before, and so we're not going to spend a lot of time on avoiding plagiarism because it's fairly familiar information for you, but a good quick reminder as we move into the research paper. So, reminder, plagiarism is the act of using another person's words or ideas without giving credit to that person. Now, the biggest problem that you face with plagiarism is intentional plagiarism, right? When you are intentionally taking somebody else's work and trying to pass it off as your own. That's the real academic honesty issue here. We're going to talk in a minute about unintentional plagiarism and how that's a slightly different beast from intentional plagiarism. Unintentional plagiarism usually doesn't cause significant problems in your academic career. Maybe a conversation with a teacher or professor who might point out that you hadn't done something correctly and that you may need to do something a little bit different. But intentional plagiarism is the real issue when we're talking about academic honesty, because intentional plagiarism is plagiarism with the intent of trying to get a better grade or pass off someone's work as your own, without really trying to put in the effort or the learning yourself. So intentional plagiarism might look like the following: turning in someone else's paper as if it were your own, copying large sections of other people's works and pasting them together to form a paper, and not really doing your own writing, but just kind of taking other people's writing and kind of quilting it or hodgepodging it together to make it seem like you didn't just copy one work, but you copied sections of works and just put it all together, and that's still cheating. Or using an online paper writing service. That's particularly tempting for some people to just go, there are in fact services, and I'm surprised at some level that they're not outlawed, but there are in fact services that allow students to just purchase a paper that one of their writers has written, and that is in fact academic dishonesty and is considered plagiarism. So in case that was unclear, that is a no-go. You're not allowed to do that. So that is what intentional plagiarism might look like. Now, why is plagiarism wrong? Well, at one level, plagiarism is illegal if it violates copyright law. And most credible sources are going to be copyrighted at some level. Most sources that are reliable and that you should be using are going to be copyrighted. And so if you are stealing somebody else's ideas and passing them off as your own, that's actually against the law. A lot of countries, including the United States, have laws that state that almost all work that's produced by a person, either art, literature, research, music, etc., movies, and so forth, they're considered that person's intellectual property. Okay, and basically what that means is they've put laws in place to protect people's potential to earn money through something, just like they protect people's actual physical property. It's why things like just downloading somebody's music or downloading a movie without paying for it is considered piracy and illegal, right? You have violated that person's intellectual property rights, and you've potentially stolen away part of their paycheck. And so that's part of the reason. And people can, in fact, make money off of their published research. People do get paid for copies of journals that they might be published in or something of that nature. And so that is considered illegal. Now, however, there are certain laws called fair use laws in the United States that say that if you're using someone's intellectual property for the purposes of education, that is an acceptable use where you don't necessarily have to pay for something if you are sure to give credit where credit is due. So when you're researching and you're looking at information from sources, you're allowed to borrow those things and include some of those things if you give credit where credit is due, as long as you're not just wholesale taking the whole thing and passing it off as your own work, right? So if you're borrowing bits and pieces and certain information from something but you're giving credit, that's considered legal according to fair use laws. So in essence, plagiarism is wrong because plagiarism is stealing someone's intellectual property at some level. Now, plagiarism is also considered academically dishonest. At some level, there are certain acts that might not be illegal, as in the case of using a paper writing service, but they are considered academically dishonest. So academic honesty, the reason that teachers and administrators and everyone cares about that is really for your own good. Because being academically dishonest, one, erodes others' trust in you, and we don't want to see that be the case. We don't want to see people not trust you. Academic honesty also cheats you out of an educational experience that can help you learn and grow. And in extreme cases, academic honesty can result in expulsion, especially at the college level. That's happened a number of times. And you may have seen even some of that with recent stuff that came out within the past couple of years about the ACT scandal and a lot of the college application scandal where people were buying ACT scores to get into college. And that did not turn out well for those students, right? So there is some real there's some real weight to academic honesty issues. I know you guys know that, and that's not new information, but just as a quick review, that's what it is, right? And you guys know it. All right, so then it raises the question, what if you're not trying to cheat? What if you're not intending to plagiarize? Now, this is the majority of plagiarism issues, actually, right? The majority of times that people technically plagiarize, they don't actually intend to, right? They made an error, or they didn't quite do something that they were supposed to do, or they didn't do it the way that they were supposed to do it. So most likely, if you're struggling with any issues, this is where you're going to fall, right? Because you guys know all about that stuff that I talked about already, right? You know about intentional plagiarism and why that's wrong. And I reviewed that merely for the sake of reviewing it. This is probably more where you would come up with a problem, right? I'm not anticipating that any of you are intentionally going to try to cheat or be academically dishonest, but you might accidentally plagiarize. Now, the good news is usually accidental plagiarism is corrected and fixed by the teacher saying, hey, you didn't do this quite correctly, here's what you need to do to fix the error, right? And there's usually no consequences to that. Possibly a point or two off of a graded rubric, but by and large, there's usually no significant consequences there. All right, so this is what you might struggle with. However, if you pay attention to what we're talking about, works cited pages and so forth, an in-text citation, you should be able to avoid even the unintentional plagiarism issues. So unintentional plagiarism could be due to the following. Failure to use quotation marks on quotes, which would mean that it's not clear that you're giving the author's exact words. Failure to summarize or paraphrase in your own words. So if you were trying to summarize or paraphrase, but you really didn't put it in your own words and you were too close to the author's original words, that could be unintentional plagiarism. Failure to cite anything, whether that's quotations, paraphrases, summaries, fragments of a note, or even ideas that you didn't originally come up with yourself, right? If that's an original idea to someone else. Now, if it's an idea that tons and tons of people have, you don't necessarily have to cite that idea because it's a very well-known idea. But if it's kind of an original idea to one particular source and they are the only people who seem to have had that idea, you can't then pass that idea off as your own, right? You need to give them credit for even that idea. So, again, if you try to do the citation and everything correctly, you should be able to avoid unintentional plagiarism. And rest assured that if you make some mistakes, I'm just going to point them out and tell you how to correct them. And I'm not going to freak out on you. I'm not going to be like, oh, this is plagiarism, you know, you're going to get a 0 on the assignment. I'm not like that with these unintentional plagiarism issues. That sort of stuff would happen if you were intentionally kind of trying to cheat, which I don't anticipate is going to be a problem at all. So, how to avoid plagiarism? Just make sure you're placing quotation marks around all quoted notes. Don't paraphrase too closely. I always suggest that it's a good idea when you're paraphrasing not to be looking at the source while you're paraphrasing it. I suggest that you first read the source, read the information, and then put it away and write your paraphrase of what they said, right? Once you're not looking at it, take a look at, oh, that doesn't make sense. Once you're not looking at it, then write your own words and your own explanation of what that source said. Also pay attention to kind of original ideas that should be cited. So again, this wouldn't be ideas that could be found everywhere, but ideas that might be original to a particular author of a particular source you're looking at. And make sure that you cite those. Really any idea that's not your own or anything that's not considered common knowledge, right? And common knowledge, I'll go over that a little bit more here in a minute, but anything that wouldn't be considered common knowledge and is available in lots and lots of sources. And then also observe documentation by other writers. As you're doing research, look at the people who you're getting research from. How did they do their documentation, right? And note what they've done because that can help you kind of learn the whole process of how to cite and so forth. All right, so what do you need to cite? Direct quotations, paraphrases, and summaries. So just to be clear, even if it's not the author's original words, but you got it from a source and you reworded it into your own words, but if you got that information from a source, it should still be cited, right? So just to be clear, not only quotations have to be cited. And that's where a lot of people get hung up. They think, oh, well, I didn't quote that, so it doesn't need to be cited. Well, if you got that information from somewhere, you need to cite that information, right? If you paraphrased somebody's words or you summarized a large section of an article, that still needs to be summarized because you didn't come up with it out of your own head. So you still need to do that citation. That means that your paper is going to have lots of citations in it. That's the way a research paper is. It's different from some of the other papers that we've done this year, right? Because a lot of those papers were based more on your own thoughts and ideas and interpretations of a text. Whereas this, you're pulling information from people. So you're going to have lots and lots of citations throughout your paper. That's normal. If it feels like too many, you're probably on the right track, all right? You're probably doing the right thing. If you're like, this seems like a lot of citations, you're probably doing it the way you should be doing it. So there's gonna be a lot of citations in there. It's not just the exact words. Even when you put it in your own words, you still need to cite it if you got it from a source. Like I said, non-original ideas, meaning ideas that were not original to you, or that are not common knowledge. If they're kind of original to another author, you need to cite that. And then facts and statistics that are not common knowledge or not commonly known. Basically, common knowledge is something like the date the Declaration of Independence was signed. Even if you forgot and you had to look that up in a source, you don't need to cite that because that is considered common knowledge. The vast majority of people know that. You can find that in a bajillion different sources. Nobody has any sort of claim on that information. And that's really what we're getting at here is, does somebody have a claim on this information or this material, right? So if nobody really has a claim on that, like historical dates don't need to be cited. Even some sorts of ideas or theories or interpretations of a text, if they're common to many, many different people, then you don't really need to cite those, right? Does anybody have a claim on the material that they could potentially exercise? Then you need to cite that material. If nobody really has a claim on it, then you don't really need to worry about it. So that gets at what you don't need to cite. You don't need to cite your own original ideas or information that nobody has a claim on. So facts that are common knowledge and can be found in many, many different sources. However, I always tell people this: you're never going to get in trouble for citing something if you are uncertain. So if you're in doubt about whether or not it should be cited, go ahead and cite it, right? Nobody's going to be like, oh my goodness, I can't believe they cited that piece of information. How awful of them. They should just be taken away. No, nobody's going to be like that, because they will appreciate that you're doing your due diligence and trying to give credit. So if you're uncertain about whether or not it should be cited, go ahead and cite it. It's not a problem. All right, so let's talk about the nitty-gritty of MLA citation. And this gets at creating a works cited page, which you should be doing as you're doing your research. You should be creating a running list, a works cited page. I know I recommended in the previous lecture that you use the Microsoft Word function. I think that'll be the easiest way for you to do it, but there are other tools available: EasyBib, Citation Machine, or you could obviously do them manually as well. So this would be the full citation. We'll talk in a little bit about the in-text citation, which is what you would put in your actual paper that would point to the full citation at the end. So in MLA, you will have a full works cited page at the end of your paper that will list all of the sources that you've used, and it will have all of the full citation information. Then within your paper, whenever you cite something from a particular source, you're going to include a brief in-text citation in parentheses that's just going to have a couple pieces of information that will point your reader to the appropriate source at the end of your paper. So first we're going to talk about the full citation, and then we will talk about the in-text citation later. All right, so just a reminder, for each source you determine that you might use for your research paper, create a works cited entry. When you're looking at a book, most of that information can be found on the title page of the book and on the back of the title page where the publication information is listed. This is usually true both for digital books as well as for physical books. And I know you guys might be using a lot more digital books given our current setup. But it's usually the same in digital books as it is in physical books, and so that kind of carries over. Publication information for things like journals and websites may be a little bit trickier to find. You're just going to have to explore the pages to find the correct information. So if you're ever struggling with something, feel free to reach out to me. Give me the website link. If you're like, I cannot find this particular piece of information, Mr. Coates, can you help me? I'd be happy to take a quick look at it and send you a message real quick and let you know what I find. Or if, in certain scenarios, that information may in fact not be available, especially with websites. Not all websites have absolutely every piece of information that the citation asks for. And so then in most cases, then you would just skip it or note that it was not available. So each works cited, it says card here, obviously we're not using cards, but each works cited entry should include two things, the full citation information, and then usually a letter to help identify the source. We're going to do that a little bit differently this year since we are doing this digitally. So I'm not going to require you to have the letter to identify the source. We'll just be using the author's last name in order to identify the source as you're doing digital note-taking cards. Because it won't be any trickier than doing a letter on a works cited card. So you don't need to worry about the letter in this case. So have the full citation information and then make sure you have the author's last name so that you can use it when you're taking notes. All right, so how to cite a book, and I'm going to give you several examples here. There are 4 to 6 things you need to know when you're citing a book depending on the book. So the ones listed in bold on the slide are ones that you always need, and then the ones listed in italics are ones that you might need depending on the book, but are not always needed. So you need the author or author's name or names. You need the title of the book, obviously. You need the publisher, and you need the publication date. Those are the things that you absolutely need with every book citation. Now, sometimes you will need the city of publication in rare circumstances. This would be the case if it's probably not going to happen, but this would be the case, say, if you had different editions of the book between different countries, so say like a British edition and an American edition, putting the city of publication might be helpful. So for example, say you were citing a Harry Potter book. There are some differences between the British edition and the American edition, particularly with language and so forth. So you might want to include the city of publication in that case because there were some differences there. Again, this is very, very rare circumstances. I wouldn't really worry about if this is the case. If you don't obviously know it's the case, it's probably not. And so I wouldn't worry about it. The edition, you would include the edition if it's given on the cover of the book. So, and this would be only if it's a numbered edition, right? So there might be some books that might say Dover Thrift Edition or Platinum Edition or something along those lines. You don't really need to worry about those kind of editions. We're looking specifically at numbered editions. So if it says like 4th edition or 2nd edition or something like that, then you would include that edition number. So here's an example. Well, this is an example of the format layout, right? As far as punctuation, formatting, and so forth. So you're going to do the last name, then a comma, then the first name, and then a period. So kind of each section of the entry is followed by a period. So each kind of different type of information is followed by a period. You're then going to do the title of the book in italics because we always italicize a title of a book. So you're going to do the title of a book in italics followed by another period. If you need the city of publication, you would then put the city of publication, comma. If not, just skip that part. Then the publisher, so that would be the publishing company, followed by a comma, and then the publication date. And that's followed by a period. So that's the publication information kind of section that gets followed by a period. So in the note here, you will see the city of publication should only be used if the book was published before 1900, if the publisher has offices in more than one country, or if the publisher is unknown in North America. So there's a little bit more information on when you might need to include the city of publication. So some old books, if you're dealing with an old book, you should probably include the city of publication. If you open up the cover of the book and it says like London, New York, Cambridge, right? That means that they've obviously got an office in England and in America, which then you would flip flip that over to the page where there's all the tiny publication information and see where this particular book was published and include the city of publication. Or if it's a publisher that's not an American publisher, right? Like, probably not going to come across this, but like if there was a publisher that was like a Russian publishing company that we didn't have in America, then you would include that. Again, these are very rare circumstances. You're not likely to use them, but there is the information for you. All right. Sample citation, if you've got a book with one author. So up top, you will see the kind of formatting, and then below in bold, you'll see the actual example. So the author's name was James A. Chapman, and so I put last name first, Chapman, comma, James A., period. And then the title of the book in italics, grammar and composition, 3, period. Now this is what you would do if you had an edition. So you will see here that this was the 4th edition, a numbered edition of the book. So I put 4th ed, period. And then the name of the publisher, Abeka Book, comma, and the year of publication, 2001, period. When you're dealing with a book, you're usually only dealing with a year of publication, not an actual date, as in day, month, and year. You're usually just dealing with the year, and that's all you really need in a book citation. All right, if you've got 2 authors, you're going to list both authors, but only the first one will go last name, comma, first name. The second author will be listed in normal order, first name, last name. The reason that we do the first author last name, comma, first name is because that's typically how we alphabetize things in like a library system, is by author's last name. So we want to make sure the last name is the first piece of a citation entry. However, that doesn't matter with the second author, and so we don't do it. We're not using that author's name for alphabetization purposes, so we don't need to put it last name, first name. Typically speaking, I've had students ask which author goes first, and it's whichever one is listed first on the book. Okay, so it's not necessarily in alphabetical order, it's just the person whose name is listed first on the book is the first author. The rest of the entry would look very much the same as before. So we've got Gillespie, comma, Paula, comma, and Neil Lerner. Okay, so you'll see that Neil Lerner's name is in the normal order. Then period, then we've got the book title in a period, and we've got the Ellen and Bacon Publishing Company, comma, 2000, period. All right, so that shows you just how we adjust it if the book has 2 authors. If the book has 3 or more authors, we do something different because we don't want the citations to get excessively long. That's not really the point of them. It's just really to give us the information that we might need to go and find that source. So if you've got 3 or more authors, really you're just going to include the first author, whichever one is listed first, their last name, comma, first name, and then a comma, and the abbreviation et al., which means and the rest, right? And so that's letting us know that there were multiple authors, more than 2 authors on this source, but you could find it if you just look up this particular author and title. So we've got an example of that there in bold, Wysocki, comma, and Francis, comma, et al. All right, so there were several other authors to that source, but we don't need them. We've got the first author, and then we've got the title and the publisher and the publication date. All right. All right, this you might come across if you're using an older book, an older source. If you've got a book with more than 1 publication date. This would be typically for something like a classic, right, which has been published many, many times throughout the years. So you're actually going to include 2 dates here, the original publication date and the publication date of the book that you actually have, whether that's digital or physical. So we'll take Frankenstein, for example. Basically, the way that you do this is after the title, you put the first publication date when it was first published, and then you go on to the publication information listed on the book, the publishing company, and the date when that book that you actually have was published. So I did this with a copy of Frankenstein that we have in our classroom here. And so you've got after the title Frankenstein, you've got the date 1831 period. And this particular edition was published by Dover. Now there are many different people who have published Frankenstein. So this is letting you know the particular version of the book that you used. So Dover, 1994 period. All right, so that's when those particular copies of that book were published. So that just gives you when the book was originally published, right? And then when this particular version of that book was published. If you can't find both dates on your book, just use whatever date is given, right? If you are only given one date, use that after the name of the publisher. But if you are given the original published date or multiple dates, the original published date should be the oldest one, and then the newest one should be the one of the edition of the book that you're actually looking at. All right, so time for some practice, and you could sit through and look at this entire lecture all at once, but it's going to be somewhat lengthy, so I would encourage you to go ahead and take a break here and do some practice and come back to this lecture later. So if you pause the lecture and then go to the book citation practice assignment that is in the research paper writing module on the home page, scroll down there, click on that, and follow the instructions there to do a quick practice citation with a book. I've included some pages from Treasure Island with the publication information so you can create a citation for it. So go there, do that, and then come back here and we will continue on with talking about other types of citation. All right, so now let's talk about how to cite a journal article. I have asked you to have some journal article sources. There are, I think it says 7 to 8, but it's actually 7 to 9. I mislabeled that slide. But there are 7 to 9 things you need when citing a journal article. Again, bold are things that you absolutely have to have. The italicized ones are things that you may or may not need to include depending on your situation. So, you're going to need the author's names again. Obviously, you're going to need the title of the article. You're going to need 2 titles here. First, the title of the article itself, and then the title of the journal in which the article was published. So a journal article is not a standalone piece. It's always published in a larger work called a journal. I'm going to go grab an example of a journal for you, and then I'll be right back to kind of show you what I mean. So I have a few journals in my classroom. I'm going to hold this up here. This is a journal called Christianity and Literature. This is an academic journal that professors and scholars publish things in that are related to Christianity and literature, as it says. So journals are published usually like once a month or once a quarter or once a year. And that gives time for scholars to do research and create information to put into the journals. And so the journal is really a collection, a compilation of a lot of different scholars' research and work. So you can see on the back here, I know it's very tiny, but this is a list of all the different articles that are in this journal. So it's not one cohesive work. It's not one thing. It is a collection of a number of different scholarly works. And so that's why you need 2 titles. You need the title of the article itself that you're looking at, and then the title of the journal that it was published in. Then each journal also has a volume and issue number. That tells us what year it was published in, and then what segment of the year it was published in, all right? So if you had volume 65, that would mean that that journal had been published for 65 years. And then if you had issue number 2, that would mean it was the 2nd issue in the 65th year, all right? So that allows you to pinpoint the particular journal that it was published in, so that you're not just kind of like looking through all the years of that particular journal to find it. So I'm I will hold this up as close as I can. If you can see this journal, you can see the volume and issue number down there at the bottom. And it also says autumn of the year that it was published in. So that's kind of what we're looking for, is that volume and issue numbers to know what particular issue of the journal that we're looking at. Then the year of publication, you saw that that was included. You don't necessarily need to include the season or the month, just the year. And then the pages. So when we're talking about pages, we're talking about whatever pages that journal article occupied. Usually if you encounter it on a digital source, it will list somewhere the pages that it originally occupied in the physical source. It might be on a PDF of the article, or it might just be in an information box about the article, and it might say it was from page 35 to 47, right? So look for that pages so that if you were actually looking at a physical copy, you could turn right to it. If you're doing an online journal article, it's a digital form of it, and you use a database to look it up, you need to include the name of the database that you use to find it. So let's say you used EBSCOhost, which we have access to find your journal article. You're going to need to include EBSCOhost on there so that people know that you accessed it through that source. Because certain journal articles are only available through certain databases. And so people would need to know, oh, I need to have EBSCOhost to go look for this article. Sometimes a journal will have its own private homepage that you can access journals and articles directly through. If the journal itself has its own page, you don't need to include a database. You only need to include a database if you used a database to find it. Lastly, if you're using an online article, a digital copy of the article, you need to include the URL, which is the web address that appears in that really skinny box at the top of your web browser, or a DOI. Sometimes there's a specific database online index number that is attached to that article, a DOI. And so you could include that instead of the URL, because that would give us another search term to find it with. So here's the format for citing a journal. It's very similar to that of citing the book. So you have the author, and we're going to do that still last name, comma, first name, just like we did before. And even if you've got multiple authors, same rules apply. The title of the article is going to go in quotation marks. That's a little bit different. So the title of the article itself will go in quotation marks. The title of the journal will go in italics. Notice after the title of the journal, you're going to give all the journal information. Right? So you're not going to put a period after the title of the journal, you're going to put a comma and give all of the journal information. So the title of the journal in italics, then comma, then volume, comma, and there you just need the number. You don't need to say volume whatever, just the number of the volume, then the issue, comma, and just the number there, and then the year, just the number of the year, no autumn or September or whatever, just the year, number, comma, and then the pages that it occupied. So like 35-47 to show that it was pages 35 to 47, and then a period. If you did it through if you did it online, then you would then include the online information. So a database name, if you had used a database, then a comma. If you didn't use a database, then you could just skip that. And then the internet link, whether that is the URL or the DOI. All right, so here's a sample citation of a physical journal article. All right, so if you were using a physical journal, Boyd, comma, Matthew, so that's the author's name and a period after that, and then keep in mind some journal article titles are very lengthy, so they're going to be long. All right. So the language of British literature and the stakes of anthologies. That one's not a super long one. I've seen longer, but it's not very short either. So that's all going to go in quotation marks. That's the title of the article. Then the journal title was pedagogy, all right, and that's been italicized. And I misspoke, I forgot, I think I was thinking of MLA 7, which I did in college, and we're now on MLA 8, and they made an adjustment, so forgive me. You do need VOL period, and then the volume number, and then NO period, and then the issue number. So you'll see volume 13, number 2. I forgot that they'd made that change in MLA 8. That's not quite ingrained in my brain yet. Then 2013, and then the pages. Do note that you're going to put PP for pages. If it was only one page, you would just put 1P. But if it's multiple pages, you would put PP, period, and then the page range and a period there. Since this was a physical journal article, we didn't have any information after that, because that would be in a case like this, where I actually had the journal in my hands. I wouldn't include any online information. However, if you were doing an online journal, you could see there, down there, I accessed the journal article here through a database called Project Muse. So I put the database name in italics, right, and then comma, and then for this one, I included the DOI. If you are given the DOI is preferred over the URL. So if your source gives you a DOI, use the DOI, and you would just do DOI colon and then the number. If you're not given the DOI, then use the URL. So that shows you a little bit of what that looks like. All right, time for some more practice. Again, feel free to pause the lecture and go over and go to the journal article citation practice assignment in the module on the homepage, and there's a link to a journal article. Poke around. You'll have to look around and find the information on the page since it's an online article. I will say this though. This is one that has not been found through a database. So what looks like the title of the website, kind of up at the top, is actually the title of the journal. This is the journal's homepage. So you wouldn't need to include the database name. However, since it is online, you would need to include the DOI or the URL. So you need the DOI or the URL, but not the database name, because this is the journal's homepage. All right, last thing, we're going to talk about how to cite. There are some other kinds of things that you could cite that you might use as sources, and I'm going to upload later a guide for citing non-traditional media. That includes how to cite certain other things that are not books, journal articles, or websites. But these are the 3 main ones, and they're the ones that I've asked you to use, and so I wanted to cover those. If you've got questions about others, I can point you to sources that will help you know how to cite them. A lot of the citation machines, like EasyBib, Microsoft Word, Citation Machine, they all have ways that you could know what information you need to gather. So there are 5 to 7 things you need to know when you're citing a website. Bold are absolutely essential. The author's name, the title of the page or article, so that's the specific page or article, and then the title of the overall website. So the page or article is going to be that one particular page that you could click on and it doesn't occupy the whole website, right? So like if you're on Canvas, Canvas is the whole website, but there might be a particular page on Canvas, right? Wikipedia, that you shouldn't be using that as a source, just FYI, but on Wikipedia, you would have particular pages / articles, and Wikipedia would be the whole website. So that's the distinction there. You also need the URL link, and you need the date that you access the material, because online material often gets updated. And so you would need to let us know when you accessed it. So if there were some changes, we would be able to see that, you know, that you weren't making something up. Then there's a couple things that are if given. If a publisher is given on the website, you would include that. And if a publication date is given, you would include that. That actually is true pretty often. Most of the time you are going to be able to find a publisher and a publication date, but there will occasionally be times when you may not be able to locate it. And so if you can't find it, it's okay, you can skip those things. You would simply, in this case, replace the publisher if it wasn't available with NP for no publisher. And if the publication date wasn't available, you would replace it with ND for no date. All right, so here's the format. Again, it should look pretty familiar now that you've seen some of the other examples. So last name, comma, first name, period. Again, with multiple authors, same things would apply that we talked about earlier. The title of the page or article is going to go in quotation marks, just like the title of the article would with a journal. And then the website title is going to be in italics, just like the title of a journal would. After the website, you're not going to put a period, you're going to put a comma, and then include the publisher and date published if it's available, and then the URL. Again, that's the address in this skinny box at the top of your web browser before you put a period. So you're at least going to have website, comma, URL before you put a period, and then publisher and date published if they're available. And then after that, you're going to put the date accessed. I'll show you the format for doing the date accessed here in a minute. So, my video is covering up just a tiny portion of it, which is unfortunate. That's okay, you'll see other examples. So here you can see an example in bold of the citation of a website. We've got Rochelle Amy as the author. We've got the title of the article, Celebrating Padme and Her Handmaidens in Queen's Shadow. Actually, I'm listening to that book right now. And then we have the title of the website, Star Wars. This was from the Star Wars official website. It was a news article about a book they published. And then you've got the publication company. It was available. So Lucasfilm Limited. Sorry, you guys know that ladybugs are crazy here, and a ladybug just flew in my face. All right. You never know what's going to happen on these recorded sessions, but I've been recording for so long that I'm not going to stop and go back and do it over again. So then we've got the date that it was published, and the format that that's going to be in is the international format, not the American format where we put the month first and then the day, but the international format where we put the day first and then the month. So 5 for the 5th, March. If it's a short name like March, April, May, June, July, we would include the whole month. However, if it's a longer month, you would do an abbreviation. So if it had been August, I would do like AUG period, or September SEPT period. So 5 March 2019, then a comma, and then the URL. All right. After the URL, and you can see that a little bit behind the video of me, you're gonna, for the date accessed, you're gonna start with the word accessed, and then you are going to put the day, month, and year again. All right, so let's practice that as well. Go to the module and look up the website citation practice assignment, and you can pause this lecture here again and go work on that citation. There is a link there that will take you to a website that you can cite. All right, when you guys are done practicing, head on back, and then I will talk a little bit about in-text citation. All right, so let's talk a little bit about in-text citation. I know this has been long, it's been almost an hour, and we're actually doing pretty good to get all this information in almost an hour. So bear with me just a little while longer. Obviously, you can pause this and play it whenever you want, but if you've been sitting through the whole thing, we're almost done. We're just going to kind of quickly breeze through in-text citations in some particular scenarios. So in-text citations in MLA are done in parentheses. We call them parenthetical in-text citations. That's the way that MLA, which is the English kind of literary fields form of citation, that's the way it does things. There are different fields of citations. Yes, I wish we would all just get together and decide on one form of citation rather than every different academic discipline having a different style, but it's the way it is, and so I'm going to teach you the way to do it in the English discipline so that hopefully you've had exposure to multiple forms of citation before you get to college. So, citing in-text in MLA is done in parenthetical in-text citation. In in MLA, there is a basic formula, and that is author's last name and page number. Obviously, page number isn't going to apply to everything, but it does apply to most things. The only thing it wouldn't really apply to would be something like a website or a YouTube video or something of that nature. If you're dealing with a book or a journal article, even if it's a digital book or journal article, it will still have a page number. And so refer to that page number and make sure when you're taking your notes that you include the page number, because you need that page number later. Don't skip over that and say, oh, that's not important, because then later when I'm telling you you didn't include page numbers, you don't have to be digging back through the book to try to find what exact page that was on, which is an almost impossible task. So make sure when you take the initial note that you include the page number alongside it and save yourself a headache. So basic format is author's last name and page number. No commas needed, no P needed for the page, just the author's last name and then the number of the page in parentheses. If you do not mention the author's name in your paper while you're writing, that sentence that's being cited, or that couple sentences that's being cited, then you need to include the author's last name. So you'll see in example 1 here, where, I mean, this is a very generic statement, but this point has already been argued. It's been argued by Tannen, and he argued it on page 178. But I didn't mention his name. So I just said this point has already been argued. Then I would need to say who had argued it and where to find it in my citation information, in my in-text citation. So I would say Tannen 178. What this would allow the reader to do is then to say, oh, Tannen, and go to my works cited page and find the listing that started with Tannen, right? That citation would then point them to all the information they needed to find that source. However, in MLA, if you mention the author's name in your own wording, in your own text, so if I said, Tannen has argued this point, all I would need to put is the page number, because the author's name had already been given, and I don't need to double that up. They would still be able to go and look and find Tannen in my works cited list. All right, so that gives you some of the basics. Now, here are some different scenarios. If you use 2 authors, or a source that has 2 authors, you would include both of their last names, like in example 3, Smith and Leas, and the page number, right? However, like in the full citation, if you've got 3 or more authors, you would say the first author's last name and then et al, and then the page number. Okay, so you can kind of see a little bit of a pattern going here. Let's say there was no author listed. That is occasionally the case for reliable online sources, especially just highly informational sources where the author doesn't really matter, where they're just giving information. That is sometimes the case, and I'm sure you will come across some sources where there is no author listed. If that is the case in your citation entry, you're just going to simply skip the author portion and go first to one of the titles, either the title of the book, there are a few books by an unknown author, or the title of the article. So here, you're going to use the title shortened to the first few words, basically just enough words to identify it in your citation entry. So a word like the is not going to be helpful. However, a word like heraldry, right? That's the first word. That was actually the entire word for this entire title for this particular source. But the first word or first few words of the title should be enough to point them to the correct source on your works cited page. Use whatever formatting is appropriate. So if the title is in quotation marks, put the first word or first few words in quotation marks. If it's in italics, put the first word or first few words in italics. And then the page number or page numbers. Note here in example 5 that I have shown you what to do if it occupies more than one page. So you would do 124 to 25. We assume that's 125 unless you put a 2 in front of it to say it was 225. And we know it's not backwards. So, all right, let's talk about a situation if you had more than one author of a source with the same last name. You might have multiple Smiths. In this case, example 6 shows multiple Pattersons. You're going to include the author's first initial alongside their last name. If the two authors had the same first initial, you would include their whole first name alongside their last name, just so that we would be pointing people to the correct source in our works cited list and they wouldn't be confused. If you've got one author who is the same author and you're citing from more than one work, so say I were writing a research paper about the works of E.B. White and I was making reference to both Charlotte's Web and Stuart Little, I would need to distinguish. I couldn't just say White in the page number because we wouldn't know which book by him. And so you're going to need to include the author's last name, then a comma, then the first word or first couple words of the title of the particular work that you're citing, and then the page number. If you're doing an encyclopedia entry and you don't have the author's last name, then you could just use the title of the encyclopedia entry. So like in example 8, Franklin Benjamin. No author's last name is given. This is not uncommon in encyclopedias that you don't have an author's last name given. That actually happens quite often, and so you could just use that as well. Also note that you don't necessarily need the page numbers for an encyclopedia. If you're doing a play, which some of you might do if you decided to write about King Lear or Hamlet or As You Like It, there are many, many different editions of plays, and so rather than doing page numbers, we're going to do it a little bit differently. So you'll see we didn't even do the author, we did the name of the play and then the act number and scene number. So in this example, King Lear, Act 4, Scene 1. And you could do this in Arabic numerals or in Roman numerals, whichever is your preference. But that just points people to the exact correct place, even if they don't have the exact same edition of the play as you. And that ties into number 10, a book with many editions. And this would be most classics have been published many, many different times. And someone might not have access to the exact same edition as you, but may still want to look that up. And so you are going to go ahead and include the author's last name and page number, but then also include the chapter number as a courtesy to the reader so they don't have to track down the exact same edition of the book that you had. So you'll see that example, Shelley 97, then a semicolon, then CH period for chapter, and 16 for chapter 16. All right, guys, that is all for today. Thank you for your attention. And for sticking with this. Hopefully this was helpful review. Maybe there was some new information or some information that you had forgotten. Make sure to complete the citation practice exercises, and I look forward to video conferencing with you guys tomorrow at 3. Have a good day.